Well, in Brother Bill's absence, I get to bring the word today. And I've come up with a 2 or 3 part message. So it'll be rather short today, but it has some continuation thoughts to leave you with and leave you chewing on to see if we can come up with some future from this. The title today is 3 Reasons Christians Fail. And it's based in Mark chapter 8, verse 13 through 21. And he left them, and entering into the ship again, departed to the other side. Now the disciples had forgotten to take bread, neither had they in the ship with them more than 1 loaf. And he charged them, saying, Take heed, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, and of the leaven of Herod. And they reasoned among themselves, saying, It is because we have no bread. And when Jesus knew it, he said unto them, Why reason ye, because ye have no bread? Perceive ye not, neither understand? Have ye your heart yet hardened? Having eyes, see ye not? Having ears, hear ye not? And do you not remember? When I brake the 5 loaves among the 5,000, how many basketful of fragments took ye up? And they said unto him, 12. And when the 7 among 4,000, how many basketful of fragments took ye up? And they said, 7. And he said unto them, How is it that you do not understand? How many times can you remember seeing a Christian fail? Or let's say you fail. Let's get real personal. How many times have you failed as a Christian? I know that's crazy because we can't count that high. Yep. Well, some of us don't have to count as high as others. Just kidding. The truth is, we fail daily. But the problem is we don't have to fail as much as we do. Some just give up and don't try to succeed in the Christian life. In the verses we've just read, we'll find some important answers as to why we fail. Let's begin to look at why these disciples failed miserably. The background here is Jesus had just finished feeding 4,000 people with only 7 loaves of bread, and 5,000 people with how many loaves? I mean, he did it twice? He actually fed 2 different groups of people? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what this says right here. He said, I fed these groups twice, and you don't remember. Now the disciples were in this boat going across the Sea of Galilee, and they only had 1 loaf of bread. In the miracle of the fishes, there was more at the end of the miracle than before it began. When Jesus divided it up, he took, and when they brought the baskets back in, there was more than they started with. I kind of like that food pantry there. Remember, little is much when God is in it. But in verse 14, Jesus gives a warning to his disciples. Take heed, beware the leaven of the Pharisees and of the leaven of Herod. And immediately they begin to question and try to figure out the answer. Now, I'm never guilty of this. I don't know about you. But Jesus spoke to them and said, beware. So what did they do? Did they say, we don't understand, explain it to me? No. They started discussing it among themselves. They didn't go to the source. Were you ever guilty of that? Yep, I am. We start trying to figure things out with our own logic and our own reason. We start trying to talk to other people. Well, what do you think that meant? Instead of coming back to the Scriptures and searching the Word for more explanation. Well, here they were. Jesus was with them in the boat, yet they failed to turn to him. Sounds real familiar to me, doesn't it? To you? I will look at the first few verses and preach on the thought, 3 reasons Christians fail. And I actually came up with 6 or 8, but these are the main 3 out of these verses. We'll consider verses 13 through 21, but the main focus on what we want to preach on today is verse 18. Having eyes, ye see not. Having ears, you hear not. And ye do not remember. In this verse, Jesus gives the 3 reasons Christians fail. The first reason is we don't look. Having eyes, you see not. There are several areas in our life that we fail to look at. We failed to look at where we were. Now, I always felt bad as a teenager. I grew up in church. I grew up in church from the time I was a baby in the cradle roll to today. And I'm not going to tell you I've never missed a church service. Yes, I've missed a few. But I've been consistently, often on more than not, in church my entire life. And I always felt cheated as a kid when we had these testimonies. God saved me from drugs and this deep, dark sin. I didn't have those sins to be saved from. I got cheated. I was a pretty good kid. I mean, as far as kids go, you know. And I didn't have this deep, dark background that God changed me from. And these other people that had these testimonies, and I thought, I don't have a testimony. Well, yes, I do, but it's not going to quite sound the same. And I was talking with one of my son-in-laws, a while back, as he was getting ready for the first time. He had been asked to come up and give a 5-minute testimony at church. Be ready when church starts. We're going to ask you to come give a testimony. Well, Dad, how do I do that? Well, we talked about it, and I said, first thing you don't do is go into this long-winded explanation about how bad you were. You may want to mention that you did yada, 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 but don't go into the gory details. And it's almost like exalting how bad you were. Yeah, you can say I was really bad and God changed me. But the focus is on God changed, not how bad. And but I always thought, where was I before salvation? Well, I can tell you where I was before salvation. I was religious, I was spiritual, and I was lost as a goose in a snowstorm. I was spiritually lost, I was religiously lost, but I was religious. I had the act down, I had the stuff down, but it was without knowledge. But for some people, you came from other backgrounds. You came from a life of uncertainty or turmoil. Or some of us, even though we might have understood the gospel at an early age, we ran for 10 or 15 years. We ran away from it. We tried to do away. We were on a path of destruction, whether we realize it or not. So we look at how far God's brought us and where He's taken us. We want to look at where we are. Now, I know that we don't want to be prideful and arrogant, but sometimes we have to say, hey, look at how good I'm doing now compared to where I was. Let's be realistic sometimes. I know that, somebody comes up and says, oh, I really like that sweater you have on. Why, this old thing? I like the sweater you have on. Thanks. I appreciate it. Accept the compliment. Sometimes in our Christian life, we won't accept any compliment towards us, because we're afraid it's going to push us towards pride, or we're afraid we might sound a little bit arrogant. Sometimes it's like, hey, I appreciate the testimony that you live or exhibit. But let's look at where we are. We are the children of God. We deserve none of the blessings that he's given us, but he's provided us with so many blessings we can't count them all. We are sinners saved by the almighty hand of God. We're different because of him. Titus 2:14, who gave himself for us that he might redeem us from all iniquity and purify unto himself a peculiar people, zealous of good works. Now, does that describe you? Hopefully, it begins to describe us. If we can grasp the fact of how blessed we are, then we'll really have a desire to serve God more fervently. Now, I tell you, we have a problem in life that sometimes when blessings fall upon us, it's because you worked hard, that work ethic we discussed in Sabbath school this morning. You work hard, then this is going to happen for you. You do this. And we learn that on the sports field. We learn that if you're in band in high school, you work hard, you practice, you drill, and in the end it pays off. But I'm not sure that's exactly how it works in the Christian life. But we also forget to look at who he is. It's impossible for us to conceive how great God really is. I think this has a lot to do with why we fail. We get to the point where we truly understand the fact that God is our Father. When we do, it will impact our life in an amazing way. Now, I don't know about you, but I've had moments or months or a period of time where I was really in that spiritual groove. I could feel it. My life showed it. And then something would happen and you get out of that groove for a while. And all of a sudden you're kind of like that tire that Nina had last week. You're kind of going not round anymore. And you're getting that thumping in your life. And you wonder, okay, am I having alignment problems with my car? What's wrong? Turns out you just need a new tire. But David says in Psalms 45, many, O Lord my God, are thy wonderful works in which thou hast done. So just think of what all God's done for you. We fail because we don't look. But we also fail because we don't listen. My daughters would get in a whole lot less trouble if they just listened to Daddy. And sometimes that's the truth. We warn them over and over, and it doesn't seem to sink in. They would wind up in bigger trouble, it seems, because they don't listen to their dad. I came to the place where when my oldest daughter was 12 years old, I realized that I said no, just as a habit. Daddy, can I? No. And I was saying no when there really wasn't a reason. And I sat down with her one day, and I made an agreement to her that I would try to say yes more often to requests and things. If I said no, I wanted to be able to give a reason. Now, don't hold me to it 100% of the time, but most of the time, I want to be able to say yes. She asked me one time, could she go spend the night with the next door neighbor? They were bestest friends. That's bad English, but it's good analogy. They were bestest of friends. They grew up together. They were now 12 years old. They were big girls. Daddy, can I go spend the night at Elizabeth's house? Every fiber in my body was screaming, no. She does it all the time. She goes over there every day. She spends the night over there. Elizabeth spends the night over here. I could not explain. And I actually had to sit down with Leanne and say, I have no reason to tell you no. But every fiber of my body is saying not to let you go tonight. And I told her, I said, I'm going to leave it up to you. You decide. She decided, well, I want to go. The lure was too much. So she went. And at 2:30 in the morning, I get this phone call from Springtown Police. We have your daughter down here at the station. Can you come pick her up? Yeah, I can. Got down there, found out that they had walked down to the little convenience store. Springtown was a one-hole place at that time. I believe that convenience store was one of only 2 places open all night long at that time. And they were not accused of a thing. Now, the other girl's brother had shoplifted some candy and got caught and busted by the police. But the police picked these 2 girls up because 12-year-olds don't need to be wandering the street at 2:30 in the morning. So parents come pick them up. And I've always said, I told you so. Still hadn't sunk into her, and I don't know how old she is. But I still remind her of that occasionally. But the truth is, we don't listen. At that particular point, she wasn't listening to me. She wasn't listening to the spirit and the attitude that I had. My attitude was, I want to tell you yes. I have no reason to tell you no. But something is prompting me to say no. If I'd have told her no, what would have happened? Well, she wouldn't have had that little run-in. And luckily enough, nothing came of it. But we don't listen. God has a command to us. The word in this particular set of scripture for sin, and I wrote down the pronunciation and the correct spelling, don't hold me to it, but it means an offense, sometimes an habitual selfishness. Habitual selfishness. So we're not talking about the just stubbing your toe type sin where, oops, this is the sin that you kind of premeditatedly think about and you keep on doing anyway. We don't listen to God. We know the truth. We just won't hear the truth at this point. And this is exactly what we're looking at. We fail because we're disobedient to God's will. We choose to follow that sin in our lives. The commands are clear. We know them. Yet we don't obey them. Why do my kids not obey? Most of the time it's because they don't listen. There are 2 things we don't listen to. The commandment, and we don't listen to the consequence. We were talking about in Sabbath school. Forgiveness, God forgives us, but He doesn't necessarily wipe that consequence away. We're forgiven, the sin is forgotten, but the consequence can linger on. Why does God give us commandments? Because He has a plan for us. Why do we give our kids rules and instructions? Because we're shaping them, we're molding them, we're teaching them. Which brings us to the second thing we don't listen to. We don't listen to God's plan for us. Now, we've talked about free will, we've talked about predestination, we've talked about all that, but God has a plan for us. The Bible very clearly says that. We know this, but we don't listen. When we don't listen to God's plans for our lives, we'll fail. The whole problem is, I want to be in control. I've got a 4-year-old granddaughter that I'm helping to raise. And she wants to be in control. Boy, does she. Now, I can usually outthink her, outplot her, and outmanipulate her. Not always, but usually. And I can give her the this or this option, knowing this is not desirable, and usually get her to choose this one over here, and she's going the path I want. But sometimes she gets stubborn. I have a plan. I have a goal down the way, and she's not cooperating. So we've established that we don't look and we don't listen, but there's another reason we fail. And this says, we do not learn and we do not remember. We don't remember from the past. If we would learn from the past, there's that idiom or that saying that says, those who don't learn from history are bound to repeat it. I think sometimes we're bound to repeat it anyway, because a lot of history is human nature. And when it comes right down to it, we might be more technologically advanced as a culture, as a civilization, but we still have the same sinful human nature running things. We have an advantage over the disciples in Jesus' day because we can learn from their mistakes. We can read the scriptures and pick and choose. We can learn from personal experience. We can learn from biblical experiences. Elijah, Moses, King David, the Apostle Peter. We can read through the scriptures and read about their lives. Their mistakes are recorded. Their successes are recorded in the Word of God. If we read it and pay attention, it'd save us a great deal of heartache. And we don't learn or remember from the promises of God. Now, I'm almost at the end today. I don't want to go into the promises of God today. Someday I want to teach on that. In fact, I had a title saying, God doesn't do miracles today. He just does the miraculous. Kind of a controversial topic. But I want to say, we have a group of people out there, not a church, but a group of religious people out there who want to take a promise in this Bible or a sentence out of this Bible and make it into a universal promise that you'll get blessed, you'll get rich, you'll live in a $500,000 house if you'll do this, and they take some of these things that God never intended to be necessarily a universal promise, but they make them into promises today. And we have a problem because we don't see them happening. I mean, your sister Kathy, we've seen some prayers answered in her life in the last few months that I believe are miraculous movings of God. Yet we don't have a miracle healer just walking around with a magic wand saying, you're healed, rise and walk, you're healed, rise and walk. That doesn't happen today. It did during the disciples' times, but some of that doesn't happen today. And I got some other things about that. But we have their examples. God promised to destroy the earth with a flood. Guess what? He did it. He promised to send a Messiah. He did it. Jesus promised that if you destroy the temple, He'd raise it up. Now, He was talking about physical body temple. He did. Jesus promised to return for us. And He will. Yeah. And He still will. Amen. Now, I want to end, we're a little bit early on time, but I want to end with this thought, and I want to throw this out. This is one of those nasty questions, getting personal, but I want to tell you that I am trying real hard with my kids, and it's hard because they're older, they have their own houses and families, to start this family tradition of the 12 stones. And this is the time of year. Now, you can argue that the Jewish calendar New Year is at a different time, but just following along with this is the beginning of our calendar year, this is the beginning of the year. What do you do each year? Well, I have stopped making promises, making New Year's resolutions. But I have tried to make New Year's a time of reflecting back on what God has done in my life. We forget that God has done some absolute miraculous things in my life over the past years, and we forget about them. If I were to ask you today, right now, get out a piece of paper and list me 12 things this past year that God has just really done in your life. Now, He made it rain. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about things that God has just absolutely done, answered your prayer, or done in your life. 12 things. Could you do it? I couldn't if I'm put on the spot, to be honest. I can sit there and I can work it through and I can think it through and I can come up with 12. But just on the spot to be able to say, wow, God did this, I forget. I forget what God has done in health, actually in wealth. I can remember times where I had no earthly idea how the next 3 weeks my family was going to eat. We didn't have it. And at the end of the month when the paycheck came in, it's like, wow, where'd those 3 weeks go? Well, none of us are getting too skinny. None of us are, where'd those 3 weeks go? How'd we make it? God miraculously brought us through that. Now, I can't tell you that I went to the flour bin and it just was continually being refilled. I don't know. But I know that God did some miraculous times. I know that one time we were heading back and forth to the hospital every single day for 9 months. And we had a car that made the hillbillies, rattletrap look pretty luxurious. And we prayed, Lord, when your children were in Egypt marching through the wilderness, you kept their shoes and clothes from wearing out for 40 years. God, can you keep this van going till we get out of the hospital? It took a couple times. The sliding door had to be screwed shut with screws to keep it from just sliding open as you're driving. But we made it. And the funny thing, and it's not necessarily funny, was the weekend that Mary got out of the hospital, the van laid over and died, never to run again. And I thought, I should have said, Lord, just keep it going forever. I prayed wrong. He did exactly what I prayed for. But it was a miracle. I can remember that. And now I sweat over my car needs repair. What do you know? I forget. I forget what God did. God cares. 3 reasons we fail. We don't look, we don't listen, and we forget. We forget what God can do, what He has done, and what He'll do again if we'll just let Him in our lives. We serve a God that for many, many, many of us, our God is too small. We want to tuck Him in that little container, put Him in that little box, drop Him in our shirt pocket, and He's there next time we're ready for Him. But we serve a God who cares about everything. We serve a God who has the power to loosen that nut or that bolt that we're having trouble with. And He cares about that if we just turn it to Him. We fail because we don't ask. We fail because we don't remember. And we fail because, truthfully, we really don't believe in a great God. Amen. Amen. Sister Nina, Brother David.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. I definitely identify with that not remembering part.